There's some things that just everybody knows. And one of those things that everybody knows is how much money is worth at any given time. And think about it. You always have known since you were like 10. No, like 8. Like 6. You've always known what $5 was worth. You've always had a sense of how far that would go, what you could accomplish with it. Even if you've been alive for decades, you have intuitively kept track of how that works. And if you're from a different country, you've always known what a basic increment of your money is worth. And you've also always known what that means. Every currency is more than just a number that allows you to buy goods and services. It means something. The fact that our money in my country is green, it means something. The fact that my money is paper in this country, that means something. The fact that in the Middle Ages, money was overwhelmingly a bag of coins. The fact that in some places way back in the day, there was bones or shells or things that were crafted to look a certain way. All of that is going to come with a whole batch of meanings. And because everybody uses money, and because it's one of the few things in life that is very fleeting in terms of the actual physicality of the money in your hand, think about what else you own for a given period of time that you have a true claim to, that also thousands, tens of thousands of other people have held in real legal ownership physically at some other point. It circulates like crazy. I mean, if you buy a used car, it's not like, oh man, everybody had the used car once. Maybe a couple people had it before you. But if you got a dollar bill in your pocket or you got a quarter in your pocket, it's kind of gross to think about how many places that thing has been. Whose pocket was that thing lingering around in, and what were they doing while it was in there? Money's weird, and money means something, and there's nothing else like it in terms of the role it plays in society and the way it shapes how everybody thinks. And it comes up in Matthew chapter 22 in a way that we are taking all kinds of time to think about because it's super interesting in this very, very famous showdown between the youngling Pharisees who the oldling Pharisees sent to represent them and take the risk on their behalf, and the Herodians. This unholy alliance gets together to get after Jesus to try to catch him in a trap. And we're in Matthew 22, verse 15 goes like this. Then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him being Jesus, in his words. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. Weird. Teacher, they said, we know you're a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth, and you aren't swayed by men because you pay no attention to who they are. So tell us then, what's your opinion? Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, you hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? And show me a coin used for paying the tax. And they were like, oh yeah, well, we definitely have those. And they brought him a denarius, and he asked them, whose portrait is on this, and whose inscription? Caesar's, they replied. Then he said to them, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. When they heard this, they were amazed. So they left him and went away. Now, tomorrow, we're going to talk about why they were amazed, and we're going to talk about the rest of this nifty little exchange. But in order to set that up, we got to think more about this money thing. And you know what money means in your culture, and you even maybe know a few things about what money means in some neighboring cultures, but we got to put ourselves in the position of the original audience to really understand what money meant to them if we want to have any chance of, one, reveling in the glory of the awesomeness of what Jesus just achieved here, because on its surface, it doesn't sound that amazing that they'd all walk away amazed, but also, two, to just understand the theology of it and keep with the flow of the narrative and understand what is actually being said here. So the type of coin that's in question is called a denarius, and this is a very old type of coin by this point in history. It had been around for longer than the United States of America, like getting toward being as old as the Protestant Reformation, older than Shakespeare at this point to the original audience. And it was something that at first was a minority currency and a minority denomination within a minority currency from the far west in Italy. Greek currencies, even leftover Babylonian currency, would have been the far more desirable thing to trade in when the denarius first came onto the scene hundreds of years before Jesus. In the very early days of the Roman Republic, way back, the common denomination of coin off of which everything else was measured, like for us, it's $1. You have a quarter. Well, that's measured off of $1. It's 1/4. It's a quarter of $1. Their base denomination was the Asarius. And it's kind of funny because when you pluralize that, it's asses. Like, I'm not trying to be crass. It's just literally the name of the plural of this particular coin. The ass, the Asarius, or the assus. And as with pretty much every currency, the base denomination ultimately is unsatisfactory for conducting all measures of business, big and small. You need larger denominations. You need split denominations so that you can get it down to more finite bits for exchanging little bits of money and little things here and there. And that is where the denarius gets introduced to the world. Initially, it's copper. It's not silver in any way, I don't think, in the early going. And it was measured by weight against the Roman pound as a percentage of the weight of an assarius. Now, the Roman pound is, just as a side note, that's a libra. And so currencies that still use the pound, like in the United Kingdom, they still have a stylized L, which I assume is derived from the old Latin Roman word libra. I think that's where that comes from. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. Maybe I'm wrong. But then somewhere in the late 3rd century, when the Roman Republic is really starting to get moving, Alexander the Great and his descendants kind of moved on into their own things. There's no gigantic power center in the East. Rome is really on the upswing, and their currency game is on the upswing. And they assign a silver value to this denarius. And it's somewhere here between the late 3rd century and the mid 2nd century that the denarius becomes associated with a day's work. And because silver is an actual metallic value thing that is worth something because of its rarity and the difficulty and human energy expenditure that goes into getting it out of the ground and separated from rocks and minerals, it's pretty dang steady. And part of the reason it's so steady is because the coin, once again, is actually made of that metal. True, it is stamped, it is struck, it is dyed, that is. And there's a reason for that language too. Let's talk about that in just a second. But the fact that the same percentage basically of silver is what's present in the coin is what causes it to keep its value. How do we know what percentage of silver was in these coins? It's kind of fun because we still have them. It's one aspect of history that we can just subject to scientific repetitive testing and get a really accurate measure of things. We also have records that still exist that tell us, what they were thinking governmentally and what they were going for here. Dang, this is going to be a 2-day conversation on coins. I'm not apologizing for it. Let's keep going. And so when they say a coin was struck, what that means is that somebody would create a die, and this die would have a receptor side that we usually print the side that we would consider tails. And then the heads side would sit on top of that. So you'd have a blank of silver. It's just an unmarked coin. So the value's all there. It's just not stamped yet. And you'd set that on the bottom part of the die. And then you'd put the top part of the die over the top. And then somebody would whack that thing with a hammer. And maybe it's a couple whacks to get that thing to imprint properly. But you would have a negative of the heads and tails sides of the coin on that die. And then as you pound it together, the coin would mush up into that recessed area, that mold. And what you get afterwards is a relatively round, good-looking silver coin where you don't lose any of the value because all of the silver is still right there in it, like 98% pure during this era prior to Julius Caesar, prior to Jesus of Nazareth. It's okay if you don't remember all of your Roman history from school. It's absolutely fine. But a quick refresher, just to keep the money thing in context, the Roman Republic caught fire, like in a good way. It had been very conservative, very linked to old money and certain political classes through the 3rd century, the 2nd century, but it was becoming dominant getting into the middle of the 2nd century and into the 1st century. And a lot of the old societal norms that had been in place start to go away. The government starts to change. Things start to become way more centralized. Things start to feel like they're leaning toward powerful men dictating everything to this republic, and the Senate having a little bit less influence. And really the last 50, 75 years of the republic are about this thing being worth so much money that you just can't trust it to a Senate. Some rich, powerful person who represents rich, powerful interests is going to end up taking the thing either for noble goals because they want to restore things to how it ought to be, like Marius or Sulla, who came after him, or even Julius Caesar. A lot of people looked at those characters and they were like, no, they're tyrants, like the tyrants we had to throw off back in the day who oppressed the people with selective application of law and with economic abuses by messing with the coinage and money and hoarding things to themselves because they had control over currency. Well, these are all the concerns that are floating around about 75 or 100 years before the time of Christ. And all of these things, particularly the value of the denarius, factors into the collapse of the Roman Republic and its quick replacement by the Roman Empire under, again, Julius Caesar's godson, whose name was Octavian, who took the name Caesar Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, the one who wanted to call everybody back together to get a census and get his hands on what he actually had here that gets us started on the birth narrative of Jesus in Luke chapter 1. There's so much more we got to talk about here. I know this is a great, big, giant history conversation we're having, but I think it makes this text that we look at in the Bible so much more rich if we get what money meant to the original audience, what money meant to the Christian audience in the first few centuries that Christianity was still happening against the backdrop of Rome, and they were reading this passage as it circulated around in the early church. I think we just got to do this. So I'm going to be committed to it. We're going to finish this conversation about the history of money tomorrow. And then after that, we're going to come back and look closely at this text, equipped with this newfound contextual knowledge we have to better understand what Jesus is actually saying and why all of this matters. So, second half of this money conversation, mañana. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.